From a toilet that scandalized Kentucky to a British sitcom that beat James Bond at the box office, Lotsa Luck hid bizarre secrets behind its laugh track. This forgotten Dom DeLuise vehicle packed more strange twists than its single season suggests, including an unaired pilot, a Golden Globe nomination, and connections you'd never expect. Fact 1. Kentucky station refused to air it. When Lotsa Luck premiered in September of 1973, most NBC affiliates across America broadcast the pilot episode without issue. But the station in Paducah, Kentucky, had a serious problem with what they saw. The pilot episode featured a scene where Stanley Belmont's family installs a brand new toilet in their home, and the toilet itself was shown prominently on screen during primetime television. This was shocking enough for the Paducah affiliate that they made an immediate decision. They would not air any further episodes of the series. While showing a toilet on television might seem completely normal today, this was 1973, and many stations and viewers still considered bathroom fixtures too crude for family viewing hours. The controversy over toilets on television wasn't new. When All in the Family became the first show to air the sound of a flushing toilet in 1971, it caused a national stir. But Lotsa Luck took it a step further by making the toilet a central prop in the episode. The Kentucky station's boycott of the show became a minor news story at the time, highlighting how different standards were for television content just 50 years ago. What's particularly ironic is that the show was already struggling in the ratings without this added controversy, and losing even a single affiliate certainly didn't help its chances of survival. Fact 2. The British original beat James Bond. Before Lotsa Luck existed, there was On the Buses, a British sitcom that ran from 1969 to 1973 and became massively popular in the United Kingdom. The show was so successful that in 1971, the creators decided to make a theatrical film adaptation. The movie On the Buses was produced on an incredibly modest budget of just £97,000, which was considered extremely low even for that era. Nobody expected it to become a box office phenomenon, but something remarkable happened when it was released in UK cinemas. That same year, the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, starring Sean Connery, also hit British theaters with all the glamour, action, and massive budget that Bond films are known for. Despite facing off against one of the most famous franchises in cinema history, On the Buses actually outgrossed Diamonds Are Forever at the UK box office. A scrappy little comedy about bus drivers beat James Bond in his home country. The film's success led to two more theatrical sequels, Mutiny on the Buses in 1972 and Holiday on the Buses in 1973. The original film remained one of the top-grossing British movies of the early 1970s. This massive popularity is what convinced American producers that On the Buses would translate perfectly to American television, leading directly to the creation of Lotsa Luck. Fact 3. There are actually 23 episodes. If you look up Lotsa Luck on most television databases and reference sites, you'll find that the series is listed as having 22 episodes. However, the actual number is 23, and there's a fascinating reason why this discrepancy exists. Before the series officially premiered in September of 1973, the producers created a pilot episode titled The Family Flew. This pilot was meant to introduce audiences to Stanley Belmont and his chaotic household, but when NBC executives reviewed it, they decided not to air it. Instead, they ordered the series straight to production and chose a different episode to serve as the premiere. The Family Flew was completely skipped over and never broadcast on television during the show's original run. It's unclear exactly why NBC rejected this particular episode, whether they found it too weak, too similar to other sitcoms, or simply not the right introduction to the series. What makes this particularly interesting is that the episode wasn't destroyed or lost. It still exists and has been seen by television historians and collectors over the years. Some sources that dive deep into television archives acknowledge its existence, but most casual references to the show simply ignore it and count only the 22 episodes that actually aired. This means that even devoted fans of Dom DeLuise who've sought out the complete series may have never known that an entire extra episode exists somewhere in the NBC vaults. Fact 4. The Dream Team that created flops. Lotsa Luck was created by three legendary names in television comedy: Carl Reiner, Bill Persky, and Sam Danoff. Carl Reiner had an incredible track record, having created The Dick Van Dyke Show, one of the most acclaimed sitcoms of the 1960s. Persky and Danoff had worked as writers on that same show and won multiple Emmy Awards for their work. With credentials like these, any network would have jumped at the chance to work with them. But there was a problem that NBC apparently overlooked when they greenlit Lotsa Luck. Just a few years earlier, in 1967, this exact same trio had teamed up to create another sitcom called Good Morning World, starring Joby Baker and Ronnie Schell as radio disc jockeys. Despite the pedigree of its creators, Good Morning World struggled in the ratings and was canceled after just one season with only 26 episodes. Now, in 1973, Reiner, Persky, and Danoff were trying again with Lotsa Luck, hoping that an adaptation of a proven British hit would fare better than their original creation. Unfortunately, history repeated itself almost exactly. Lotsa Luck lasted one season with 23 episodes, making it their second consecutive one-season failure working together. This pattern raises an interesting question about television success. Even the most talented and accomplished creators can struggle when the right combination of concept, casting, and timing doesn't come together perfectly. Fact 5. Dom DeLuise earned a Golden Globe nomination. Despite Lotsa Luck being canceled after just one season, the show did receive recognition from the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Dom DeLuise, who played the lead character Stanley Belmont, earned a Golden Globe nomination in 1974 for Best Actor in a Television Series, Comedy, or Musical. This was a significant achievement considering the show had already been canceled by the time the nominations were announced. DeLuise was competing against some of the biggest names in television comedy that year, and while he didn't win the award, the nomination itself was a validation of his performance. What makes this particularly interesting is that Golden Globe nominations are often seen as indicators of critical respect and industry recognition, which Lotsa Luck otherwise received very little of during its brief run. The nomination suggests that even though the show itself didn't connect with audiences or critics, DeLuise's comedic talents were strong enough to shine through the material. This was still relatively early in DeLuise's career before he became widely known for his film roles in Mel Brooks movies and his frequent appearances on talk shows. The Lotsa Luck nomination helped establish him as a legitimate television leading man, even if the show itself couldn't sustain an audience. It's one of those odd moments in television history where an actor receives major recognition for a show that most people have completely forgotten existed. Fact 6. Shot on videotape, not film. While most sitcoms in the early 1970s were shot on film, Lotsa Luck was produced using videotape, which was a significant and noticeable difference. Videotape was cheaper and faster to use than film, which made it attractive to producers working with limited budgets. However, there was a substantial trade-off in visual quality. Shows shot on film had a warmer, more cinematic look with better depth and texture, while videotape had a flat, harsh appearance that looked more like a live broadcast or a soap opera. For sitcoms trying to create a polished, professional atmosphere, this was a major disadvantage. Lotsa Luck suffered particularly from this choice because it made the show look cheaper and less prestigious compared to its competition. The pilot episode, which was shot on videotape like the rest of the series, looked especially terrible according to viewers and critics at the time. The harsh lighting and flat visuals made the sets look artificial, and the performances seemed less dynamic. This might seem like a minor technical detail, but visual presentation matters enormously in television, especially when you're competing against shows that look substantially better. In the 1970s, audiences were becoming more sophisticated about production values, and a show that looked cheap on screen was already fighting an uphill battle for respect and viewership. The videotape decision likely saved money in the short term, but it may have contributed to the show's inability to attract and hold an audience. Fact 7. The pilot audience barely laughed. One of the most telling signs that Lotsa Luck was in trouble came during the taping of the pilot episode in 1973. An audience member who attended the live studio taping later reported on their experience, and it was not encouraging. According to this witness, the audience managed to produce only 2 genuine, unforced laughs during the entire taping. This was a disaster for a comedy that was supposed to be funny enough to carry a full season on network television. When a studio audience doesn't laugh naturally at the jokes and situations unfolding in front of them, it creates a serious problem for the producers. They need to add a laugh track in post-production to make the show sound funny when it airs, but this creates an artificial quality that viewers at home can often detect. The fact that the pilot failed so badly with a live audience should have been a major red flag that something was fundamentally wrong with the show. Whether it was the writing, the performances, the pacing, or simply that the British humor didn't translate well to an American setting, clearly the comedy wasn't landing. What's particularly notable is that this audience member felt strongly enough about how unfunny the taping was that they shared their experience publicly, which has survived in the historical record decades later. It's a reminder that sometimes the people in the room during production know immediately when something isn't working, long before the general public ever gets a chance to see it. Fact 8. The most invasive laugh track. Ever when Lotsa Luck finally aired on NBC, critics and viewers immediately noticed something jarring about the show's sound design. It had an extraordinarily aggressive and intrusive laugh track. While most sitcoms of the era used canned laughter to some degree, Lotsa Luck took it to an extreme that became impossible to ignore. Critics at the time specifically called out the show for having one of the worst laugh tracks in television history, with loud, enthusiastic guffaws added to virtually everything that happened on screen. Characters would simply say each other's names in greeting, and the laugh track would erupt as if something hilarious had just occurred. Someone would walk through a door, and the audience would supposedly roar with laughter. The constant barrage of artificial laughter became exhausting for viewers and made it difficult to determine what was actually supposed to be funny versus what was just ordinary dialogue and action. This overuse of the laugh track likely stemmed from the disastrous pilot taping where the real audience barely laughed at all. The producers knew they had a problem with the show's comedy not landing naturally, so they apparently decided to overcompensate by drowning every scene in canned laughter, hoping viewers at home would be convinced the show was funnier than it actually was. Instead, the excessive laugh track had the opposite effect, making the show feel desperate and inauthentic, and drawing attention to its weaknesses rather than covering them up. Fact 9. Kathleen Freeman, the rudely opening doors expert. Kathleen Freeman, who played Stanley's mother on Lotsa Luck, had one of the most interesting and specific career specializations in Hollywood history. A television critic once described her as an actress who was particularly adept at opening doors rudely, which is both oddly specific and surprisingly accurate when you look at her body of work. Throughout her 50-year career in film and television, Freeman built a reputation for playing loud, frumpy, often abrasive characters who would burst into scenes with maximum impact. She had perfected the art of the intrusive entrance, whether she was playing a nosy neighbor, an overbearing mother, a strict landlady, or a busybody relative. Her characters were almost always interrupting something, complaining about something, or causing some kind of domestic chaos, and she could convey all of this through her physical presence and timing before she even delivered a line. Freeman appeared in over 100 films and countless television shows, including memorable roles in The Blues Brothers, Houseboat, and The Nutty Professor. By the time she was cast in Lotsa Luck, she was already a recognizable character actress who audiences immediately understood as that loud, pushy woman from Everything. The role of Stanley's domineering mother was perfectly suited to her talents and typecast, which was probably why she was cast. While Lotsa Luck didn't become a career highlight for her, Freeman continued working steadily for decades afterward, ultimately becoming one of the most prolific character actresses in American entertainment history. Fact 10. A gaudy orange toilet with purple lid. The infamous toilet that appeared in the pilot episode of Lotsa Luck and caused the Kentucky station boycott wasn't just any ordinary bathroom fixture. It was described by viewers at the time as a gaudy, very 1970s-style orange toilet complete with a purple lid and purple seat. This color scheme was peak early 1970s bathroom design, when avocado green, harvest gold, and yes, orange bathroom fixtures were considered fashionable and modern. Many American homes during this period featured colorful bathroom suites that would be considered hideous by today's standards, so the show was actually being authentic to contemporary interior design trends. However, the bold orange and purple combination made the toilet even more visually prominent and impossible to ignore when it appeared on screen. It wasn't just that a toilet was being shown on primetime television, which was already controversial enough, but it was a loud, attention-grabbing, impossible-to-miss orange and purple toilet. The prop department clearly made a choice to embrace the tackiest possible aesthetic of the era, which fit the show's working-class setting where the family wouldn't have been able to afford expensive, tasteful bathroom renovations. Still, the garishness of this particular toilet may have actually made the controversy worse because it was so visually striking that it became the focus of the entire scene. Viewers couldn't look away from this ridiculous orange toilet, and apparently the NBC affiliate in Paducah decided that one look was already too many. Fact 11. Moved mid-season to Friday's death slot. When Lotsa Luck premiered in September of 1973, NBC scheduled it for Monday nights at 8 o'clock, which was a reasonably decent time slot. However, Monday nights also meant the show was competing directly against Gunsmoke on CBS, which was still a powerful ratings performer, despite being on the air since 1955. Lotsa Luck struggled badly in this competitive environment, failing to attract enough viewers to justify keeping it in that prime position. After just a few months on the air, NBC made the decision to move the show to Friday nights immediately following Sanford and Son, with the change taking effect on January 11, 1974. On the surface, this might have seemed like an improvement because Sanford and Son was one of NBC's biggest hits, and Lotsa Luck would benefit from its lead-in audience. However, Friday night television in the 1970s had already earned a reputation as the death slot for sitcoms. Viewers, particularly younger audiences, tended to go out on Friday nights rather than stay home watching television, which meant lower overall viewership regardless of what shows were airing. Moving a struggling show to Friday night was often seen as a network giving up on it and simply burning off the remaining episodes before cancellation. The move to Friday didn't help Lotsa Luck at all, and the show was canceled shortly after completing its first and only season. Fact 12. All main characters kept their British names. When American producers adapt British television shows, they typically change many elements to make them more familiar to American audiences, including character names. Lotsa Luck followed this pattern to a degree, but in a peculiar way that reveals how closely it initially tried to stick to the original On the Buses format. The main character in both versions was named Stanley, and his brother-in-law was named Arthur in both shows. Stanley's sister was named Olive in both the British and American versions. These names were kept exactly the same, despite being somewhat uncommon in American sitcoms of that era. However, there was one character whose name was changed. Stanley's best friend, who was called Jack in On the Buses, was renamed Bummy for the American version. What makes this change ironic is that the actor who played Bummy was named Jack Knight, so they essentially changed the character's name from Jack to Bummy while hiring an actor named Jack to play him. It's unclear why the producers felt the need to change this one character's name while keeping all the others identical to the British version. Bummy is obviously a much more distinctive and nickname-sounding name than Jack, so perhaps they wanted to give the character more personality or make him seem more like a colorful working-class buddy. Still, the overall pattern of keeping most names the same suggests the show started as a fairly faithful adaptation before presumably diverging in other ways. Fact 13. Replaced by a massive hit. After Lotsa Luck was canceled in the spring of 1974, NBC needed something to fill its time slot. The show that replaced it was a new sitcom called Chico and the Man, starring Jack Albertson and Freddie Prinze. While Lotsa Luck had struggled to find an audience and barely lasted one season, Chico and the Man became one of the biggest television hits of the entire 1970s. The show premiered in September of 1974 and immediately connected with audiences in a way that Lotsa Luck never had. It climbed into the top 10 most-watched shows in America and stayed there for multiple seasons, making stars out of both its leads and becoming a cultural phenomenon. The dramatic contrast between these two shows occupying the same time slot, less than a year apart, highlights how unpredictable television success can be. Both were sitcoms produced by major networks with experienced talent, but one disappeared almost instantly while the other became a major hit. For NBC executives, the replacement of Lotsa Luck with Chico and the Man must have felt like vindication that their decision to cancel the struggling Dom DeLuise vehicle had been correct. The time slot wasn't cursed, they simply needed the right show in it. For fans of Lotsa Luck, if any remained by that point, seeing such a massive success immediately follow their canceled favorite must have been particularly frustrating. Fact 14. Lost and Found Department. Setting. One of the biggest changes American producers made when adapting On the Buses into Lotsa Luck was the main character's occupation and workplace setting. In the British original, Stan Butler worked as a bus driver, and much of the show's comedy came from his interactions with passengers, his boss at the bus depot, and the various mishaps that occurred on his routes and at work. This made perfect sense in Britain, where bus travel was and remains a major part of daily life. However, American producers apparently felt that making Stanley Belmont a bus driver wouldn't resonate as well with American audiences, so they made him the manager of a lost and found department instead. This was actually a creative choice that opened up new comedic possibilities that didn't exist in the original British version. A lost and found department meant that every episode could feature bizarre, unusual, or valuable items that people had accidentally left behind, creating built-in story opportunities. Did someone lose a wedding ring, a valuable painting, a pet, strange clothing, important documents? Each lost item could become the center of an episode's plot. The setting also maintained Stanley's working-class status while giving him a job that was distinctly American and relatable to viewers who had experienced busy transit hubs or public facilities where lost and found departments actually mattered. Despite this potentially promising change, it wasn't enough to save the show from its other problems and its inability to capture the audience that the British original had found. Fact 15. Never aired in Britain. Despite British origins, given that Lotsa Luck was directly based on the Buses, one of the most popular British sitcoms of its era, you might assume that the American adaptation would have been of interest to British viewers curious to see how their beloved show had been reimagined. However, Lotsa Luck was never broadcast in the United Kingdom during its original run or at any point afterward. British audiences never got to see Dom DeLuise's take on Stan Butler, renamed Stanley Belmont, or how American writers had adapted the familiar characters and situations they knew so well. There are several possible reasons for this. First, British television networks may simply not have been interested in importing an American remake of a show they already had and loved. Why would British viewers want to watch an adaptation when they could just rewatch the original On the Buses, which continued to air in reruns? Second, by all accounts, Lotsa Luck was not a successful show by any measure, so there would have been little motivation for British networks to pay for the rights to air a failed American sitcom. Third, British audiences in the 1970s were notoriously skeptical of American adaptations of British properties, often viewing them as inferior or unnecessarily changed. Whatever the reasons, the complete absence of Lotsa Luck from British television means that the show exists in a strange historical bubble, known primarily to American television historians, while remaining completely unknown to fans of its British source material.